welcome to church. Easter Friday. I am excited for this weekend because, like I said, I don't take this lightly. For many of us, it's just a fleeting weekend. It's a busy weekend. It's a stressful weekend. You might have family visiting. You might be leaving to visit family. Whatever it is, can we take this moment and just remember what this is about? And I'm so excited because when we are confronted with this reality, it needs to leave something inside of us. It needs to leave a mark in us. It can't just be something we observe and leave. Something needs to happen in us. And so this morning, we're going to unpack what this means. And so if you're a guest with us this morning, I pray that you'll be welcome. And I really trust that God would speak to you today. Amen. Great. I want to share this quick story with you. When my wife and I just got married, we decided to spend a week in Cape Town, and one of our favorite places, and we stayed in Blouberg. So if you're familiar with the area, you'd know Blouberg is one of those places where you can see the mountain from anywhere. That's really why we went, the mountain, nothing else. Because, Cape Town also has nothing else to offer but the mountain. It's like we have the river, they have that one thing. Okay, they've got the ocean and everything, but we don't care. And what we decided to do is we're going to do one activity every day of the week. So we were going to do certain things every day, and that would be the thing, And so the one day we decided, let's do the red bus tour. Let's go around the city and just see the beautiful things. And the following day, we'd go for a hike up the mountain. And so we kind of got dressed in, just our relaxed clothes, and we took the red bus tour, and we didn't know that it actually stops at the mountain. So on the way there, we realized this actually goes to Table Mountain. Look, we're there. We might as well save ourselves the petrol tomorrow and just do it. And my wife is newly married, so she says yes to everything I suggest. I'm newly married, so I don't know better. I'm just it's excitement. So we decide, let's do this thing. And so we decide we're going to hike up Table Mountain. Here's the problem. Neither of us were prepared. I've got shorts and canvas flat shoes. She's got pumps. Ladies, picture that. She's got pumps on. And a dress, not even like stretchy pants, When you look at the people coming down from the mountain, you can see they were prepared for this. You look at us, we look like tourists. And like I said, it's like I'm newly married. I don't know what you can and can't put your wife through. I'm just like, let's do it. She's like, let's do it. We buy one bottle of water. It's a 2-hour hike, and we decide to go. And I don't know if you've seen, but if you look at the contour of Table Mountain, it's very much like a line graph of the petrol price. It starts very flat and then it exponentially just goes up. Just suddenly, it just does that, So we start off easy and we kind of like, this is lekker, And then we hit that part on the gorge where the steps begin. And I was like, I made a mistake. And she looks at me and I look at her and I'm like, babe, we've got two options, And we're like, let's do this. But then I realized the easier way to do it is something I've learned from hiker friends in the past. And I realized in that moment, my wife has no hiking experience. None. I married the wrong person. It's too late. I've already said yes. The ring is on. I can't back out. I can't be like, let's go home, trade you in for someone. No, none of that. So I'm like, let's keep doing this. And what I realized is this. If you create focal points along the way, it becomes easier to manage. So if you stand at the bottom and you just look to the top, it looks like a massive journey. But if you can find a focal point within your range of distance and say, let's just get there. So what I say to her is, look, we might not get to the top, but let's just get to that rock and we'll pause. And she's like, okay, good, it seems doable. And we just keep doing that. We get to that point, we pause, we look over, we admire the view. Once we've caught our breath, I'm like, okay, now we're going to go to that point. And then we're going to go to that point. And doing this over and over made the journey feel slightly more palatable. And by the time we got there, we realized we've made it to the top. Simply by having different focal points along the way. And as I did this, I realized this was a lesson to me. I made a note. I was already on full-time staff then, so everything is like a sermon illustration. So I made a note on my phone, like, this is like a sermon right here. Like, couple of years, 10 years later, I finally get to use the sermon illustration. I'm glad. When we read the book of Hebrews, we realize that the author of Hebrews creates this moment where he helps us see the same thing. He helps us create focal points in the journey called life. Because life very much is like a race, like a marathon or like a hike. In fact, that's the very words the author uses. He says, continue to run this race. So as you're going on this journey, what happens? We've got moments where we pick up momentum, right? Have you ever been in that season of life where things just go amazing? Everything is going well. You've just got money in the bank. You don't know where it came from. It's there. You don't ask questions. How it got, it's just there, If you're married, it's just like your marriage is beautiful, Everything is well, Your spouse looks at you, you look at her, you're like, yes, man, this is what we signed up for, Your kids just behave. It's like they float around the house. Yes, mommy, yes, daddy. You're just like, wat gaan aan? It's just those seasons are beautiful. But then we've also got seasons where the motivation dies and it feels like everything we do just works against us, right? It just feels like nothing is going right. Everything you try backfires. That's the reality of life. We've got seasons of highs and seasons of lows. We've got seasons when we're fired up, where we're excited to take on new projects, new things are going well at work, we elevate, we get promoted, it feels like there's momentum, and then there are seasons when it feels like that dies out, and we're demotivated, and we feel like, is this really worth it? We've had seasons like that. At work, we feel it. Is this really worth it? You know, we've got that manager that makes you feel like nothing here is worth it. I'm about to quit like now. If you're that manager in this place, we're going to pray after the service. It's going to be okay. Right? In seasons in our marriages, we kind of just feel like, what's going on? Is it worth holding on? Man, this is not what I signed up for. That's just the reality of life. And the author of Hebrews just gives us this beautiful perspective in only 3 short verses about this reality of what it entails. But then what I love about what the author does is they give us this focal point. And he says, listen, regardless of the highs and regardless of the lows, if you can simply just have a focal point, it puts everything else into perspective. You know what this does? If life is the journey or the hike, then Easter, this weekend, is a moment where on the journey you hit a plateau and you are able to look back and reflect on your journey. You are able to look back and look at where you started and how far you've come. Because we don't often do that, do we? Look back and say, if that's where I started, look at how far God has brought me. It's also an opportunity to look back and say, this is why I started. This is why I signed up for this. This is why I said yes to this. Because that's another thing we don't often do. We don't reflect on why we began. If you grew up Christian, then you kind of just got into it. You don't often reflect on where this comes from. If you haven't grown up Christian, then you would know that there's a past. And you reflect on what that means for you. I'm kind of aware that we've got some electrical issues. Let's just call it a party. Let's just say our lighting system wants us to celebrate. It calls for a celebration this weekend. So the strobes are going to go off, but can we just endure that for a second? It also seems like we are out of some aircon units. You know what? The devil is a liar. We will survive. We're going to all write books after this about how we endured a church service for 2 hours with no aircon. That's a struggle novel right there. We'll be okay. Let's read the book of Hebrews together. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 to 3. It says this, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, that you and I will not grow weary or lose heart. 3 simple verses that the author of Hebrews puts right at the beginning of chapter 12 that give us so much perspective. Bear in mind, we firstly don't know who the author of Hebrews is. Secondly, he's writing to a Jewish audience who would have been familiar with the concept of a Messiah, that there is a Savior. And if you know the context, then the previous chapter, chapter 11, is this massive hall of fame of people who have gotten it right, people who have faced challenges like you and I, but how they conquered. So you'd read this phrase over and over, by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith Abraham, by faith Noah, by faith Moses. So it's just this great hall of fame of people who experienced what you and I do, the highs and the lows, yet they've overcome. But what the author does is says, they didn't have what we have, we've got someone to fix our eyes on. He gives us a new focal point. Let's explore what the author says. It says this, first of all, throw off everything. The weights, in inverted commas, that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. So he says, throw off everything. Since you are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, right? There are others who are on the same journey, others that have gone before us, others around us. There are people in our lives that cheer us on. So that's the great cloud of witnesses, right? And he says, since we've got such a great cloud, let us throw off everything. Everything that hinders. The Amplified puts it this way, stripping off every unnecessary weight. and the sin that so easily and cleverly entangles us. See, entanglements was something that was in the Bible long before Will and Jada Smith. Like, we all get caught up in entanglements, right? It might not be like theirs, but we've got our own entanglements, right? The things that just we get wrapped up in, right? And it's these weights that we pick up in the journey of life. And we all know what that is. For some of us, it's just the everyday pain that we walk with, things that have happened to us, things in the past. Some of us live with sorrow consistently. Some of us have lost loved ones and we carry that weight to this day. Some of us know what it is to walk with disappointments. Some of us feel like we move from disappointment to disappointment over and over. And we ask ourselves, when am I going to be set free of this thing? Some of us walk around with discouragement, right? Over and over. Some of us have this unrealistic expectation, either that we put on ourselves or that others put on us. It feels like there's just this constant pressure. I've been speaking to a lot of my friends, and they have, like, you know, when you were first born in a family, it always feels like the pressure is on you. Like, you can't disappoint, right? If you were much older and you're the firstborn, then everything is on your shoulders. You have to bear for your siblings, and if your parents are older. And I know so many people who are caught in this, and they just feel like that pressure is constantly there. Like, I cannot mess up. Everything depends on me. We live with that pressure. What happens is this weight, it hinders us. We don't feel free. We don't feel like we can escape it. It's constantly there. So the author of Hebrews is familiar with this reality. We've got these weights in our lives that hold us down. Weights that we've either put on ourselves or weights that others have put on us. And here's the thing about these weights is they cause us to lose focus. Because when you walk around with a weight, what happens is you constantly focus on it. You're not free to focus on your focal point because you've got this thing that you have to carry with you. Isn't that true? The second thing he says is, let us throw off every weight that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles. See, this is the one that's more subtle than the weights, because the weight we kind of know is there, but the sin that so easily entangles is something that we don't always see, because sin is so deceptive, right? Sin is so deceptive. It creeps in. It's so subtle that it makes its way into the depths of our hearts, and it's exactly what it does. It entangles. It gets you trapped in a position or situation where you feel like you can't break free from it. And we begin to see this deterioration. You know what sin does? Sin kills. Sin absolutely destroys whatever it comes into contact with. Sin destroys. Sin deceives. Sin deceives us into thinking that we're actually more okay than we think we are. Or it deceives us into thinking that, well, there is no hope beyond where we are. You know what sin does? Sin robs. It's not like just a normal robber. It's like not like a gunpoint robber. No, it's like a pickpocket. It's very subtle. It's like before you know it, it's like, where is it? And you realize my joy has been robbed of me, and my peace and my hope has been robbed of me. And before I look up, it's like, what happened? How did I get here? Sin is one of those subtle robbers of all that is good in our lives. Sin creates distance. We know this because we all know, like when you've got kids, you don't need to teach your kids to be naughty. When they're naughty, they'll tell you because there's distance. Right? I've got one of those daughters. When she does something she knows, she hides. She stays in the room, and I call her. I'm like, Amelia, what did you do? She goes, listen, let me tell you something. That's always her thing. Daddy, let me tell you. Daddy, let me tell you. Listen, child. But what happens is she creates distance, because that's what sin does. It creates distance between us and God, and us and all that God has for us. That's what sin does. Sin overwhelms. Sin makes us feel like, man, this is more than I can bear. Right? It overwhelms us to the point where we ask ourselves, is this worth living? Is life worth living? It tricks us into thinking that this burden is so heavy, the sin is so bad that it's not worth living anymore. If you've ever been in that position, you know what that darkness feels like. And then finally, sin leads to guilt. Have you ever lived with that guilt on your shoulders that there's something that you just can't bring into the light, because if people really find out about it, your reputation is gone? That's what sin does. It keeps the guilt and the shame there. Many people ask, well, what is it? People always ask me, like, is it a sin to? Is it a sin to do this or a sin to do that? Why? Because we're trying to find that line. But here's the thing, it's not about the details. Have a look at the sin is anything that stands in direct contradiction to God's way, God's word, and God's will. So anything that is in contradiction to God's best, that's what it is. And so we need to understand this, because otherwise we're tempted to find where the line is, and as long as we don't cross the line, we're okay. That's not the approach we want to have. We want to understand that anything that is contrary to God's best, that is what sin is. It's so subtle that it creeps into our lives. And many of us, we know the effects of sin. You've dealt with it. You've experienced it. Maybe you're in the latter part of your life where you've gone through it and you've come out of it and you know what it's like to carry that. And for many of us, we might still be wrestling through it. And here's what happens is we try and find a way around it. We try and put things in our lives to deal with it. And we have these coping mechanisms where we either say, well, that's who we are. It's a part of our personality. Or we have all these other things where we're like, okay, this will soften the blow. But the reality is the author of Hebrews points us to one thing. Because he says in all of this, the weights and the sin, there's only one solution. Maybe you've tried a different one. Maybe you've explored. Maybe you've experimented. But there's only one solution. And the author of Hebrews points us there. He says this, let us run this race with perseverance, the race marked out before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. See, he makes it so simple. He says, listen, no matter what happens in this race called life, if we can keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, the weights and the sin is what he deals with. So it becomes something that you and I don't need to walk with and carry for the rest of our lives if we can simply fix our eyes on Jesus. You know what happens when we do that? We find a new focal point. When your focal point has been your struggles, your stresses, your weights, your worries, your concerns, your past, your sin, those things have been your focal point. And the author of Hebrews says, listen, take your eyes off those things. Fix your eyes. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Find a new focal point. That is the only solution to so many of these challenges that we find ourselves with. Many of us have tried other solutions, and maybe you've learned the hard way. If you haven't, take some advice from a couple of people in your community of faith who have gone that way before. Save yourself the time and trouble. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Our freedom from sin doesn't lie in any human effort. Anything we can do, anything we can buy, anything we can pay for, it lies in Jesus. So this means that Jesus becomes the ultimate example of how we can persevere and how we can endure. Because like the author says, because he endured and he persevered, we can keep him as our focal point because he knows what it's like. He faced the same challenges we did. Think about it, everything we're facing. Think about lack. We serve a God who moved from town to town, right? Think about feeling neglected and abandoned and betrayed. I mean, is that not the crux of that crucifixion weekend, that everybody who you've been journeying with for years suddenly leaves you? Think about feeling disappointed. Have you ever felt so anxious that you literally sweat blood? If not, we can look to Jesus because he has. Have you ever felt that your soul or your spirit is crushed? We can look to him because he has. See, he's the ultimate example for all of this. And then the author goes on, he says this, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross and scorned its shame. See, this is a verse that we mustn't skip over because it gives you perspective. If you pause and you ask yourself, what was the joy he set before him? For him to endure that, he must have seen something that not everybody saw. Here's the thing about us. We all know what it is to look forward to something and therefore to endure something to look forward to. Like, I'm one of those guys, like when I was a kid, when I knew that we were going on holiday, and holiday was only ever the Northern Cape, which if you know, is not a holiday. That's not a holiday destination. That's concentration camp-like location, you know? That's when your parents want to teach you a lesson, they send you there. Long, dry, flat. I'm yet to have conversations with my parents, it's okay. But we went to the Northern Cape, and every time I knew we were leaving, that week, that excitement starts to bubble. 3 days closer to the time, you know what happens? You start getting naughty. You ever have those kids that get naughty when they get excited? Like I would be that kid. I'd start doing crazy things around the house. Then I realized God has rewarded me with a child just like that. I've got a child like that in my house. Church, pray for us. He's that kind of guy, like when he knows we're leaving, like we left a few weeks ago, like when he knows we're leaving, he starts to do laps around the house and he chucks stuff everywhere. And I'm like, Levo, what are you doing? He's like, I'm just excited. Chill, man. But we all know what it is to look forward to something. You've all been in a situation where because you know what lies at the end, you are willing to endure whatever it is. If you've ever studied, you know that degree at the end, listen, these late nights will be worth it. You know? If you ever have those moments where you really, really love someone, you've got them in your life and there's a bit of distance, you will travel where you need to travel to see that person. And if they're close to you, you will make a plan, right? Because you know what it is to endure something, knowing what the end result is. One day I'm going to have a ring on your finger. I won't have to drive 7 kilometers to see you anymore. That's my truth. Let me speak my truth. That's the distance I was speaking about, okay? Listen, like when it's a month before your wedding, that 7 kilometers is the longest 7 kilometers. What do you think Jesus saw? What do you think he saw when it says for the joy set before him? It means he had his eyes fixed on something. Can I put to you that as the scripture teaches us, that he saw you and I? That he saw us in the image that God created us in. He saw us with the dignity, with the purpose, with the life that he gave us. And with that before him, he was able to endure the cross. If you know something is worth it, you will endure it. So with his eyes fixed on us, he endured the cross. See, here's the thing we don't often see about the cross. We've often seen the romanticized version. We see the movies, some well-made, some not so well-made, And we kind of see the sanitized version where it's like Jesus on the cross, ripped, six-pack, muscles, bulky. I'm like, bulky Jesus looks cool, And he's got like that nice, neat little white cloth around him, just like to cover enough. You're like, yeah. But when you read this, have a look at the next verse. It says this: he endured death on a cross and ignored the disgrace it brought him. The NLT says this: he endured the cross, scorning its shame. We don't see how shameful the cross was. It wasn't this neat, romantic, ripped, gym buff oak Jesus with a nice little white towel. No, you were stripped completely naked. So we get the sanitized version. It was extremely bloody. It was extremely disgraceful, extremely shameful. One of the worst things you can do in today's society is to shame someone publicly. Have you noticed? It's like the worst fear for people is if you embarrass me publicly, if you shame me, I will not forgive you. Do anything to me. Listen, take my money, take whatever. Just don't shame me. That's why one of the worst things you can do to like a corporate organization is to badmouth them on Twitter. Have you ever done that? Listen, I've had moments where I've struggled with companies for weeks and weeks, and suddenly just one tweet on Twitter and you just mention them, and suddenly DMs like, hey, we've got our service agents, we're ready to call you, we'll resolve this, plus you'll get a free whatever. You're like, ja, julle sal leer vandag. It's like we don't want to be shamed publicly. That's like the one thing. One of our biggest fears. Have you seen whenever like in public, like some big thing happens, like the first thing people do is whip out their phone. And it either escalates or sometimes it's like, nope. I don't want to be a hashtag on Twitter. Done. Right? Because that's one of our worst fears. Yet, for Jesus, one of the worst things for us is the very thing he endured. Public shame and humiliation. Degrading, demeaning, and dehumanizing. It says he endured the cross, scorning its shame. He overlooked the disgrace of the cross because he was keeping our eyes on us. For the joy set before him, he was able to endure. Can you just think about that for a second? The cross was so shameful, yet he did it. What's the worst thing you and I can endure today? Like, what's the worst thing you've endured? What's the worst thing that you are like, you know what, I will not do that. Whatever that is, it's nothing in comparison to what Jesus endured by having the right perspective and the right focal point in his life. So for you and I, if we just simply keep our eyes on him, what we'll realize is everything else fades away. All the weights, all the sins, all the stresses, the concerns, the worries, all of this suddenly falls into perspective when we keep our eyes on the right focal point. The only question to ask is this, is all of this, I mean, when we get the depth of the cross, the question I have to ask myself is, was that worth it? Because let's be honest, let's look around at society. Let's look at our world. Let's analyze it carefully. When I look at the world, I don't just see, neat and tidy. I see the hurt. I see injustice. I see crime. We live in South Africa. We see deterioration all around us. Like we are surrounded with this, right? And the question I have is, because I mean, these things weigh heavy on my heart. I look at society, I look at the deterioration, I look at what's happening with ideology and with culture, and I ask myself, God, was that worth it? Because look at your people. It's like Moses, like these are your people. God is like, no, they're yours. No, they're yours. I look at society, I'm like, God, was this really worth it? Because if it was, surely more people would get this. But here's the beautiful thing, and really the thing that makes us different to Jesus is that he was willing to endure it, and that's why for him it was a sacrifice. Because sacrifice means that, hey, I'm giving something up with no assurance that there will be a return on this investment. That's a sacrifice. Listen, if you know there would be a good return, you'd be like, shop. But if you know I'm doing this, and some of these people might not accept this gift that I'm giving them, some people might not receive it. Some people might actually turn away from it and say, look, I don't care for it. Some people might look at it and make fun of it and mock it. Some people might just walk away from it. That's the sacrifice. But for him, it was worth it. Just to look at beyond those saying no, and just to look at those who might one day say, you know what, I want that. Just to look at how we would be filled with purpose and life and abundant life. Just to look at how we would be restored from what God initially intended, where we would be in relationship with him. Just to look at how his kingdom would expand and grow, and people's hands would be raised in worship, and people would find life, and his church would be the hope of the world. Just looking at that, he was willing to endure it. So was it worth it? Yes, it was. It was absolutely worth it. The question is, was it worth it to you and I? Is all of this worth it? Is Christianity worth it? Is life worth it? Is all of this worth it? I know so many people who go through life, and I've been in that space where you ask yourself, I don't know if life is worth living anymore. And we have this in various places in our lives. I don't know if my marriage is worth pursuing. I don't know if my spouse is the one anymore. I don't know if it's worth investing into this. I don't know if my kids are worth raising. Jesus, please. I don't know if this job is worth enduring. I don't know if the circumstance is worth holding on to. Because we live in a society where it's so much easier to give up, that we don't see the worth and value of what we endure beyond that particular moment. But if we can do what Scripture teaches us and keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, then everything we face now becomes worth it, because to him, we were worth it. It becomes worth it because to him, we were worth it. So, 3 thoughts I want to leave us with. The first one is this. The author of Hebrews gives us 3 elements in this particular passage that is worth doing. The first one is this, is to look around. They say this, that with such a great cloud of witnesses. See, we often are tempted that when we go through the worst of our life, we think that we're alone in it, don't we? We think that we're the only ones going through it. Whatever you're facing, the devil's temptation is to have you think that you're the only one going through that. You're the only one experiencing marriage challenges. You're the only one experiencing financial challenges. Everyone seems to be having it all together. You're the only one struggling with mental health. You're the only one who have got kids that are slightly unruly. You're the only one going through this. But if we do what the author of Hebrews says and just zoom out a bit, there's such a great cloud of witnesses. This is not just in the past, just right now. Such a great cloud of witnesses. People who are going through the same things we are, who have lived the same life we have, who have experienced the same things we have. If we were just to zoom out, you'll realize I'm not alone in this. We've got a great cloud of witnesses that can encourage us. I can draw strength from your journey. If they've overcome it, so can I. If they've gone through it, so can I. If their marriage still stands after 20 years, so can mine. If their kids grew up past that wobbly phase, so can mine. If they can bounce back from a financial setback, so can I. If their business can be restored, so can mine. All of these things that I experience, if they can do it, I can. I've got a great cloud of witnesses. The second thing is this. Once we've looked around, look within. Because these are where the blind spots come. Think about it. I've got some of these weights. If you guys can just help me quickly. I've got these ankle weights. I love these things, but I hate these things as well. They're so difficult to put on. Okay, I've got a whole, okay. Hang on, let's see if this works. Listen, this is rough. People willingly put the stuff on them. Like willingly, like by themselves. No gun to their head, nothing. Listen, if my back just gives in, I need one of those church catcher people that catches you when you fall. Like, I need one of those. Are we okay? Great, thank you. I'm so scared. Thank you, Joe. The stuff we go through for a sermon illustration. Listen, don't just drop it. You must let it down slowly. Like, in the words of the great theologian Adele, go easy on me. There we go. Yena, Jesus, here we go. I submit my spirit into your hands. Yena! Okay, I'm fine. As comical as this is what so many people walk around spiritually. Just this weight. Listen, this is exhausting. It's 2 minutes. I won't make it. But for many people, this is their lives. They've just got this weight hanging from them. For many people, this is their reality every single day. And you know what the crazy thing is? There might be moments where Jesus alleviates the weight for just a little bit, and you're thinking, oh man, that feels so good. Yes, and that is so relieving. And you might be thinking, man, okay, Jesus, I'm going to leave this in your hands. And you give it to him. And then Monday morning comes and you pick it right up. You've given it to him, but for some reason, because this has become so much a part of who you are, because it's become so much fused into your identity, you've grown up with it. It's all you've ever known. There's never a time when you can't remember having this. And so when the author of Hebrews says, hey, lay aside every weight, you might be asking, how? That's like asking me to give up a part of who I am. The pain of having to let go of something that's always been there is very draining. And so what we choose is we'll walk with it. And we somehow work around the discomfort, and we somehow learn to counterbalance, and we somehow just get used to it. And when others around us might see that we're walking with a bit of a limp, we kind of make excuses for it. No, this is my past. This is how I grew up. Right? This was my dad. This is my mom. This is what my grandparents said. This is my circumstance. I grew up in this situation, and so this is now a part of who I am. But we don't allow Jesus to actually say, I can relieve you of that weight. You don't have to walk around with this. I can take this off. I can make this lighter. Have you ever been in that position where you've just had something like a burden taken off your shoulder? I mean, that's the very word we use in culture. It feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Thank you, guys. I think I've endured enough. Yes, Joanne, you do this every week? Guys, can we just honor Joanne for a second because wow. Hey, that's it. Thank you very much. I don't know how you do it. I pray that God blesses you with a husband who's twice as strong. Listen, Joanne is available. Submit your CVs to Neo at United Church. There's an interview process. There's a whole screening. We need to check your bank balance, your investments, all of that. I put her on the spot. She's like. And the second thing is this. So we've got the weights. But here's the other thing. I don't know who's ever had to deal with this. With wire fences. Have you ever had to deal with this? If you've never, I grew up in the ghetto where we didn't have enough money for precast and fancy walls. So do you remember when we had these wire fences, right? And have you ever tried to be naughty with wire fences? So I mean, we did some, I'm not going to mention everything because I don't want to give you ideas, but we did some crazy things. We used to bunk school, and our schools didn't have palisades. It had wire fences, so it was a skill to learn how to jump over these. And the problem is, they all crisscross, but then at the top, they've got these spikes, like these ones do. Got spikes sticking out. And so what happens is you kind of have to do that thing where you hold it down, and then what happens is it starts to wobble. So you do that. Because you don't want to lean to either side. I mean, some of you are just as naughty as I am. I'm glad I'm not the only one. So you kind of have to do the wobble thing, and then you get to the middle, and then you have to watch your pants because it can hook anywhere here. And you kind of have to do the other foot, And Jesus help us. If you hit that thing at the wrong angle, it takes something and it rips. And you pray that day that you've got jeans on, because if you've got shorts on, it leaves marks. So my mom, being the wise woman that she is, knew what to look for. So I come home with scratches and bruises. Where were you today? I know where, Ma. Cuts, bruises, scratches. Why? Because the reality is this, is that the sin that so easily entangles always leaves a mark. right? The sin that so easily entangles. It so easily entangles you. You don't realize how you got there. One minute you were trying to do something you know you shouldn't. Next minute you've got cuts, bruises, and scars that you live with for the rest of your life. The beautiful thing is that's not what God wants for us. The good news is that the scars do heal. And they become a testimony. The other part of the good news is that we don't have to do that anymore. Because wherever there's a wire fence, there's a gate. So you know someone's been doing the wrong thing when they could have gone through the gate. The only reason we do that is because we know we shouldn't be. So we try to make our own way, our own plan. When I was in grade 2, I had one of those schools where it was like tucked away. So we had a teacher that would send us to buy cigarettes. I know, don't judge me. I was in grade 2. So she would send us during school hours to go buy loose cigarettes. And so this became like we became professionals at this. The reality is there was a shop across the gate, but you knew you couldn't go out the gate because you'd get caught. So you'd run across the field, jump the fence, buy them, come back, jump over. It was that whole thing. When you know you shouldn't be doing something, you're bound to choose the path that resists God's best for you. So when the author of Hebrews says, I need you to look within, what he's saying is, you know there are some weights that you live with, or you know there are some sin that has entangled you. Can you take a second to look inside and say, what is it? Have I got weights? Have I got sin? What does Jesus need to free me of? And then the solution to that is the third one, and that is look to Christ. Look to Christ. Like, you don't have to try and untangle yourself from the weight. You don't have to try and untangle yourself from the trap of sin. You can simply just say, God, I hand this to you. And he begins to loosen that weight. And the thing that's been holding you down all your life, the weight of your past, the weight of your expectation, all of this, Jesus is able to just say, hey, I've got this. In fact, there's another verse that says this, cast your cares upon him. That's all this means, is to simply take all of this and say, God, I give it to you. I make you my focal point, and I leave all of this in your hands. Does it take a bit of work? Yes. Is it easy? No. Is it worth it? Yes. It is so worth giving all of this up. It's so worth saying no to sin. It's so worth allowing Jesus to take this weight off us. It is so worth it. Can we look to Christ? Can we look to Christ for forgiveness? Many of us, Jesus says, yes, I've forgiven you, but we struggle to forgive ourselves, don't we? We struggle to forgive ourselves for things we've done, things we've endured, things that have happened in the past. We just live with that. Can we look to him for forgiveness? Can we look to Christ for encouragement? Because for some of us, we try and look for encouragement in so many other external things. Can we simply just look to Christ to find encouragement? Can we look to Christ for endurance? Because for many of us, we don't know how we're going to endure. We don't even know how we're going to make it out of the season that we're in or the circumstance that we're in. But can we simply look to him for encouragement and endurance? Can I encourage you with something? He's seen the end goal, and he knows that it's worth it. We need to see that. We need to see that it's worth holding on to. Then finally, the end of verse 3, it says this, consider him. Think about him. Look to him, right? Consider him who endured such opposition, all the shame, all the disgrace, the crucifixion, the pain, the blood, the hanging up, the suffocation. He endured all of that, such opposition from sinners. Here's the reason, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. What a beautiful way to wrap it up. All of this, everything he endured, simply so that you and I won't lose heart, won't lose courage, won't be demotivated, won't experience a dip, won't experience a low, so that you and I can look at that and say, you know what, all of this is nothing in comparison to what lies ahead. If not in this life, then in eternity. But what I know is that everything in the end will be worth it. It will be worth it. Amen. Are you encouraged this morning?